Good morning. Happy snow day. I decided that I could not let my first day as pastor, my first Sunday as pastor at the church within, go by without making some kind of attempt at delivering a Sunday message. So here I am in my dining room with my cell phone, talking to myself. Well, not really to me, I guess. You'll eventually see it if you're listening right now. But this is what we've got. It's not going to be high quality film. Like I said, it's my cell phone, but we'll make do with what we have. So before we get to the message that I had prepared for today, I hope that you are on our email list so that you got your homework assignment. It's a snow day. Snow days are made for creativity. I hope that you've gotten out into this wonderful winter wonderland today, or maybe just stayed inside and done something fun as if it were a snow day when you were a kid. Weren't those the best days? I will say, while we will not be checking for grades, there will be extra credit if you build a fort using pillows, sofas, sheets, anything that makes a giant mess. And if you have kids, they should be responsible for cleaning it up because it's an adult snow day after all. If you do make something fun and you want to share it with the rest of the community of the church, then I will put a link in the description of this video that you can use to post it on our Facebook group. I look forward to seeing what you've done. So then, January 5th. We're 5 days into the new year. How are those resolutions coming? I realize that for a lot of us, the idea of a resolution is something that we don't really call into our everyday life. The idea that just because it's the first of the year means that we should start something new doesn't resonate with all of us. That being said, all around us in the world, new cycles are beginning because of the start of the year. We have this kind of general agreement that this is a beginning time. Even if you haven't started something now simply because it's the new year, doesn't mean that you haven't started something new at some point in your life. So I want to talk about that, but I don't want to talk about just the decision-making process for starting something new. I really want to talk about those first steps. Making something new in your life, although we don't always think of it as such, also means that we have some small endings. Beginnings always bring endings. If we're going to start something new, we have to make space for it. We have to make time for it. We have to have intention to make it happen. And that means that some other things are likely going to fall away. Also, when we think about a new beginning, we think about maybe a threshold. That first step feels so exciting, so exhilarating. And we really focus on it. And then the second step and the third step and the fourth step sometimes get left behind and maybe not so remembered. A new beginning isn't like a threshold. It's not like stepping from outside to the inside of the house in this cold weather. A new beginning is more like stepping out of a mud puddle. You take the first step, and then the second and the third, but there's still mud on your boots, and it's still kind of tracking on the carpet. You can't really forget that you were in the mud because of the mess that's kind of being left around as you move forward. But I think it's important. It's important even with the muck, even with the mud on what is invariably white carpet, that we keep taking those steps. What I want to be clear about is the breadth of what I'm thinking of this morning as I talk about these new beginnings. I'm not only talking about things like a new job or the decision to eat more healthfully in the new year or doing something like yoga. Those things are all really important, and I do think that they are well worth striving for. I also think that we can talk about things like quitting smoking, leaving a relationship that's not working for us anymore, that isn't healthy for us, or just trying for one more day to stay sober. I want to talk about the resolve that it takes to move forward, and I don't want it to be trivialized. I don't want it to seem like it's something small. Because for any of us who have tried any of those things, it's not small. It's not the easiest thing to do. If it were, we wouldn't have to have such resolve in order to move forward with it. And these things that I'm talking about are the stories of our lives. They're the things that we say yes to. The stories that we have to tell are really what it is that we're about, living through, living in, walking through every day. I have this friend, Beth, who has taught for a number of years this class called Seeing Sideways. It's a really powerful class. I think I may have spoken about it before, actually, and I'm certain that I'll reference it again. One of the concepts that Beth introduced me to in that class is the idea of the fishbowl. The fishbowl is this kind of concept that allows us to recognize that our life has boundaries. Usually those boundaries are just the everyday that we don't even think about. Who am I born into this world? How do I show up here? What you see about me, what you know about me, creates boundaries around me, sometimes that I push my head right up against, and sometimes that I never even know are there. So in her class about this idea of the fishbowl, or when she discusses this, she, on the very first day, gives the kids a small bead, just a small craft bead. It's nothing special, just a small plastic bead. And she gives them some very detailed instructions with that bead. I think she says something like, here's your bead, do a project with it, bring it back next week. So the kids have a week with a bead, and that's all their instructions. That's a pretty wide open fishbowl. Now, mind you, she hasn't introduced them to the idea of the fishbowl yet, but they've found their way into one. I'm not sure swum is a word, but if it is, that's what they've done. They've made their way into a fishbowl. And so they come back the next week, and some of them have created this whole world. So sometimes the project just has a physical representation. So imagine that a kid brings in maybe a watercolor painting that is of an underwater kind of village maybe. And then what this student will tell you is a story that goes along with that. So imagine that there is an undersea world in which this bead is a magical pearl. And it's a magical pearl because one day a couple of fish were swimming along and they saw this pearl, this magic bead, swimming, floating, falling through the water. And as they dove down deeper in order to see what that pearl was all about, they were barely missed by a net that had come to scoop them up. And so they were certain that some fishy overlord had dropped this bead into the water only for them to be protected. And so they create an entire civilization about this bead. A kind of cargo cult, if you will, for fish, as if fish worship things. And so they build a vast city on the bottom of the ocean. And because they've built their city on the bottom of the ocean where the pearl happened to fall, the nets can't get to them. And so clearly the magic of the pearl, the wonderful blessing of that pearl, has remained true for them. Now, on the same day that that pearl fell, there was some guy on a fishing boat at the top who was just ready to throw out the net. And as he was getting ready to, the bracelet that his son had made him for Father's Day, yep, you guessed it, the bead bracelet, caught on his butt and broke. And he caught all the beads but that one, and it fell into the water. Oddly, shortly after he broke that bracelet, that area became pretty bad for fishing, and they stopped going there anymore. Other students, on that same second day that this student may have told this story, will sit down, looking exasperated, with a bead on a piece of dental floss. They've made a necklace. For the kids who love no limits, they love just being poured out into this kind of free-flowing creativity, that assignment feels like absolute liberty to them. For other kids, other students, people who are more used to having some parameters and they want a structure into which to pour their creativity, this feels like prison. Not having directions feels like they've been trapped. Where do I start? And so that's where the idea of the fishbowl can come in, and how Beth applies it to the class and to the students. They realize whether they perform better inside or outside a fishbowl, and really, even if they think they're outside a fishbowl, it's probably just a larger dish than the other students are in. And so new beginnings, really, if we look at it from that perspective, are as if we're changing the shape of our fishbowl. Or maybe we're moving into a completely different fishbowl. What matters is that when we have a new beginning, the perimeters, the rules around our lives and how we function change, and we have to get used to that, and it makes starting something new sometimes difficult. And sometimes it's difficult because we walk into a situation where the expectations are too restrictive and we don't know how to perform there. Other times it's entirely too open-ended and we don't know how to start. The other thing that's important when we're starting a new beginning is not only do we have to kind of figure out where are the edges, where do we start, where do things end, we also have to recognize what are the other things involved in that beginning that we haven't thought of before. So, for example, if you're quitting something that you no longer want to have in your life because it doesn't serve you, others might look at you and think, why is this hard? this thing you're doing isn't even healthful for you, it's not even good for you, it's killing you, why would you continue doing that? But the fact of the matter is, there's secondary payoffs for what we're doing. Clearly, at some point, there was an initial payoff, a primary payoff for the behavior, but we've come to recognize that it doesn't serve us any longer. The secondary payoffs, though, go away as well. And so, when we walk away from that thing, it's hard sometimes to recognize what all those secondary pleasures are, secondary payoffs from the world. And so, if we look at that metaphor of the mud puddle, that's why it really makes sense, I think. Because stepping from one thing into the next isn't so simple as that. So sometimes I think that people, for example, who are in abusive relationships, from the outside I've heard others just announce bravely why if he ever tried that with me, he'd have another thing coming. And it seems to make sense. And if we stick with the metaphor, of course we would think, why would anyone want to stand in the mud? Well, no one does want to stand in that mud, that metaphorical mud. Sometimes they don't even realize they're in it. Sometimes in life we find ourselves landing in places that are high and dry and seem amazing. And then shortly after or sometime later the rain starts. And little by little the ground becomes saturated and we don't even realize that it's happened until there's mud all around us. And then while we're standing in that place, it's not only that there's mud all around us, but all the things and all the people and all the things about life that we love as well are also in that mud. And so the idea of leaving that mud becomes impossible because we have to leave behind everything else, or at least we think we do. And then, does it feel selfish if I escape on my own, if I've left everyone else that I love back in the mud, or if I leave because this bad thing is happening, well, what about all the good things that happen too? I don't want to lose those. And so it becomes almost too much, the idea of stepping out of the mud that we didn't even know we were in the first place. And so what I would like for you to do, if you're comfortable, is to allow your eyes to close and to take a good deep breath. I would like you to think about some shift that you would like to bring about in your life. It can be a New Year's resolution, if you're that kind of folk, or it can be anything that you've been looking at or working on for a while that you just can't seem to shake, or you just can't seem to get fully established. What I would like is, while you hold that image in your mind of what it is, I'd like you to fill in the meat around it. I'd like you to fill in that picture of what you would be like should that thing happen the way you're imagining it. If you do that, what's different? What's different in the people who are in your life? What's different in how you show up in the world? What's different in how you have time for things or don't have time for things that you currently do? What does that shift really look like for you? Now, as that really fills in for you, I want you to look at those things that are going to fall away, and I want you to recognize that grieving for that is very appropriate. Even when things end that aren't serving us, there's a grieving process because there's a change, a big change in life that impacts far further into our experience of the world than just the thing itself. I would like you to look at those things that you'll have to let go of in order to unfold into this next best version of yourself. And what you really have to do is weigh for yourself, is it worth it? Is what I have to let go of worth what it is that I'm leaning into with my life? And let that settle in for a minute. Take a couple more deep breaths. And when you're ready, let your eyes open. Or not. You can keep them closed if it's more pleasing to you. So to whatever extent you were able to imagine this world, this new world, inside which you're hoping to move into, this new fishbowl for yourself, we really have to ask about that willingness, the idea of, am I willing, am I able and willing to do what's necessary to get from where I've been to where it is that I believe I want to be? Now, there's this kind of small s self part of the mind that we refer to as the ego mind, and the ego mind's greatest goal is to ensure its own survival. And there's part of your small s self that thinks that these outside pieces are part of you, that they're your identity. And so for the ego, when we get to this point where we're going to make a big change, the ego gets threatened. Because, well, I've always been that, or I've never been that before. How can I be that thing now? It's too much to consider. What we have to do in those moments is remember that it's true. We are going to lose some of those secondary payoffs that come with whatever it is that we're changing. What we also have to recognize is if we're willing to lean far enough into what it is we want to become, that we will be able to take some steps forward. And no matter how far you lean, if your feet keep moving, you won't fall. And if you keep moving your feet and you keep moving forward, then what you'll find is there are some secondary payoffs with what you've imagined in your life that you didn't expect either. There will be new people, there will be new experiences, there will be new ways of being that you hadn't anticipated, that you didn't know would come with this change. And so if we can trust in that, if we can keep taking those steps forward, then life will unfold as it unfolds. And it'll be a conscious choice on our own part. We'll be engaging our own growth. If you are at all familiar with AA, then you're probably familiar with the idea of sobriety being a one day at a time kind of thing. And sometimes, to be honest, for people who I know closely, it's not even a day at a time, it's an hour at a time. Because sometimes the idea of doing this thing, staying sober, starting a new habit, letting go of an old habit, whatever it is that you're doing, the idea of doing it for a week or a month or for the rest of your life is just too overwhelming. We can't think about it. It's too much pressure. How can I right now do all of that? But the thing that's important to remember is we don't have to do all that. Just like the saying from AA, I only have to do it for today. And if I can't manage it for the whole day because that seems like too much, then I can just do it for an hour. And if I can't do it for an hour, well, at least I can do it right now. Pema Chodron, along with a lot of teachers, really use this idea in reference to meditation, and it applies really off the cushion as well. And it's the idea of staying. And so if I'm trying to do a thing and it's getting really hard right now, if I can just stay with that, if I can stay with it being hard, then I can get through it. And the idea there is if I'm staying, if I'm in this moment, then I can be aware of my breath. And if I'm breathing, then my heart's beating. And if my heart's beating, then I'm still alive and I must be mostly okay in most situations. And if I can keep doing that from this now to the next now to the next now, then eventually I'll get through whatever that hardship is. And I'm not talking about things that are somehow perceived hardship. I'm talking about real life grief, real life mourning, real life hurt. It's all temporary. And if I can just stay from this now to the next now until I get to a now that doesn't feel like this anymore, then I've stayed long enough to walk through the hardest part of it. What I think is that if we come back again and again to that moment, to the staying, to the willingness, then we'll find ourselves beyond the struggle, beyond the anxiety, beyond what it is that's holding us back historically, so that we can move into a better kind of now. And so, if you would, let your eyes close if you're comfortable and pray with me. To all of creation in which we live, we offer gratitude for this precious human life. We have within us wholeness that is constantly emerging into life so that we can uncover the next best version of ourselves. As we uncover this, we realize that there is no part of who we are that isn't worthy of love. We discover that we are here to be of service. We discover that it takes nothing more than a commitment to keep moving forward while staying in this perfect moment. For all we are as people, and all we are as a people, we are very grateful. And so it is. Amen. Thank you so much for watching this impromptu Sunday morning service in my dining room. I'm so excited to see this Church Within grow more and more in our commitment to service and outreach to the community. If you would like to help us support this mission, you'll also find in the description portion of this video a link to our donations page. We use those donations to enable us to do work with organizations like Midtown Mental Health, where we're able to support clients there, many of whom make their homes on the streets. And in weather like this, we know that being able to reach out to them is very important. We use our donations to reach out to another of our community partners, which is Concord Center, and they work with folks who are infected by or impacted by HIV and AIDS. We work with them as well as Midtown several times through the year, holding events at our property, at our facility, or going to their facility, or sometimes just connecting them with resources that they need that we can connect through the people who show up on Sunday mornings. And so everything that we do is treated with stewardship of the finances that you're able to share. We carry that out in the community, and as always, our number one focus is on service and how we can grow in our own lives through service through others. I'm also going to put a link in the description that will take you to our calendar that will let you know what's going on at the church. So today's January 5th. Off the top of my head, the things that are coming up soon that you'll want to know about are a workshop with Christian de la Huerta next weekend, Friday night and Saturday during the day. Those are two separate workshops that you can register for. And then also starting at the end of this month will be the first of the Mindful Path series that Resta Burnham is leading at the church. And you'll want to look into those as well. There's information about those on the website as well as in our weekly emails, and you can find that on the calendar as well. That'll be linked, as I said, in the description. So have a great snow day. Try to make something fun, be creative, and just enjoy yourself.